Well, Dean Skelos and Shelley Silver may see a silver lining in this week's Supreme Court decision about former Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell's case. Why, you ask? Well, of course, the former Senate Majority Leader and Assembly Speaker, each convicted of corruption within weeks of each other. Lord knows we've talked about it on this program at length. But now their attorneys, they're planning to appeal, and it's all based upon the High Court's decision this week to vacate McDonnell's conviction. The Republican was convicted of corruption for receiving money and loans in return for political favors. Supreme Court, it narrowed what is considered actual corruption and what's considered business as usual. And I got to tell you, Doug, we had on our good friend Mark earlier, and this whole redefinition, if people know what McDonnell was convicted for, I mean, even the judge in issuing the ruling said, hey, this doesn't feel right or smell right, I get it, but even if he kind of enriched himself, he had to clearly know at the time there was a quid pro quo. He was going to be trading a political favor for cash or whatever else. And it's got to be so overt, it's got to be almost spoken or written. I don't think that's the spirit of what political corruption should look and feel like. I mean, I don't understand how possibly Skelos, but particularly Shelley Silver, didn't abuse his office. Am I just misreading what the definition of this is?
Well, I think the problem is the definitions the Supreme Court seized on that. They're looking for a definitive quid pro quo. That's exactly what they're looking for. They want to make sure you're not criminalizing routine political behavior. And so that's the exact problem. If the only way you're going to be able to prosecute a case like this is that if you get somebody with a wire saying, listen, if you give me 25 grand, I'll make sure I get it done. And that's where it's getting to. And maybe that's right. Maybe that's the way it should be, because we know the political game is you support the candidate that will do the most for you. Maybe not overtly, but we all kind of know what you're doing when you give them money.
What an indictment. The shame is, I think he's right, but what an indictment on the political system. But to me, let's break it into two parts. First, I still think this is open and shut, but Dean Skelos clearly used his office and his influence to get his numbskull son a job. The kid didn't even show up for that, a different story, okay? But there is wire conversations of saying, you know, with son and father. Okay, I don't even want to go down the road where they even say, hey, they may be listening and they keep going. But be that as it may, Amy, clearly his office influenced a person who wanted to have business before the state or to get state contracts to hire his son. But the more egregious one for me was even Shelley Silver. Taxpayer funds were used to set up a program, and with that program, he made sure the doctor was funded who performed the study. That same doctor issued referrals to Shelley Silver's law firm. How is this not corruption by definition?
So what happened in the McDonnell case is that the Supreme Court said that an official act has to be the formal exercise of a government power. It did not apply to McDonnell's case because what they said is that by him setting up a meeting and getting a Rolex in return, that's not really an exercise of government power. Now, in the other two cases, Skelos and Silver, clearly—
Does that make sense to you, by the way, what you just said?
It does, because what if I were to set up a meeting just because, listen, I have a friend, I'm not using the power of my
compensated for it.
True, but they're saying then you could punish people. You would have corruption cases left and right, and there have been an increase in the past couple years in corruption cases.
But now
the prosecution of them.
If you're Prepahara, now work through the two cases with Silver and Skelos.
Okay.
Why, if you're Prepahara, do you say, wait a minute? If McDonnell gets off for putting a Rolex on his wrist, new chandeliers in his house, taking his wife and him for tours everywhere for people with business for the state, how can I prove that Shelley Silver didn't also profit from his business because of his title?
Because those two guys' attorneys are trying to come up with a ridiculous argument. They're saying, listen, yes, there were instances where they formally used the exercise of their government power and got money in exchange. But there were also instances where they just simply made a phone call or did some sort of a favor that wasn't related. We want the case retried because how are we to know what the jury based their decision on? If they based it on a mixture of both the government power usage and just personal connection setting up meetings, then it's a corrupt verdict because it's not only based on their formal exercise of government power. They're also saying that because one of the Supreme Court judges decided that going forward there has to be a revised jury instruction, that those juries for Skelos and Silver received the wrong instruction. But it doesn't apply retroactively, because then what are you going to do? Go retry every single federal corruption case?
necessary,
It's
you should.
ridiculous.
Oh,
If necessary,
come on,
absolutely.
Mayo.
Well, let's look at it realistically. You have to convict someone beyond a reasonable doubt.
First of all, do
And
you have one of these crooks here who's on trial? Are you representing any of
No,
them?
I'm
All
not.
right. Because, by the way, Mark did. I didn't realize that until Malcolm Smith's his, but go ahead, yeah.
But if you think about it, you have to, in a trial, convict the person beyond a reasonable doubt of each particular offense. So you have to have a meeting of the mind of the juror. And the jury has to say, let's say for count one, they have to agree as to why the person should be guilty.
Don't
Now,
do your legal jujitsu with me for a second. Time out for 1 second. You know the facts as well as anybody. Did Shelley Silver, as the facts as we know that, commit a crime in abusing his office, profiting as a consequence, and using taxpayer dollars as basically the oil to facilitate?
Well, I would tend to think that what Governor McDonald did is improper, and also what perhaps what Mr. Silver and Mr. Skelos did is improper. The question is, though, after the Supreme Court's decision, you can't be found guilty based upon what Governor McDonald did. So it's a very fair argument to say, well, look, why am I being found guilty here? Is it because of the same conduct that Governor McDonald engaged in, or is it for some other conduct?
So we're basically saying, if I get you, if I'm a sitting Senate Majority Leader of any state in this country, and some guy wants to come to me, and I'm an attorney, by the way, says, hey, forget about trial work here. Get me on top of the docket in terms of the list, and talk to all your buddies. Let's see if we can pass some legislation that's going to help me get some government contracts. And here's a yellow envelope. Why do it in the dark at night? Do it right on the floor, right in his office where the camera's rolling, because that's not illegal now.
Well, I think Preparara would say that that's business as usual, and business as usual has been improper for quite a long time, and I tend to agree. Now, but again, looking at the Supreme Court's decision, you could have 12 jurors, and 3 of them found the person guilty because of things that the Supreme Court recently said is okay. And if that's the case, you don't have a unanimous verdict with respect to those counts.
And basically what this does is, like you're saying, this totally legalizes pay to play. It says that if you have money, you can get a meeting with somebody and influence public policy. That's what it says.
It gives all the incentive in the world to continue that.
You know, Rich, what it really says is the court has a problem with the expansive interpretation of the bribery law. And what it's saying now is you legislators, the people that make the laws, you can go out and make specific laws that have to be followed by these people. Unfortunately, you have the politicians who are making the laws that will be subject to the laws.
You know, I've always thought that the problem was, if you have a legislature that's a part-time legislature where they can have a side job, it always was a crock to me, and I have a lot of friends, so I'm not trying to cast as broad aspersions. I can see Brodsky having a heart attack right now if he's watching. But if you're basically working in Albany 4 days a week and you're an attorney, your 5th day a week, you're not doing trial work. You're basically facilitating, you're about access. So, but now this goes beyond that. It's not just in your side job what you do. We're saying, like the governor, that you can be paid and compensated here if you can't prove that one had to do with the other, with a wire or a written thing. Go jump. I hope this is not going to hold up in New York here, because I think we, the people, will not be best served by it. But okay, coming up next, we pivot. 2 college rape cases causing controversy. One never even went to trial, even though 2 women say they were assaulted by the very same guy. The other one resulted in a 6-month sentence for a rape conviction. Table to discuss the pitfalls for prosecuting sexual assault cases.